From Singapore. I'm super excited to be a part of the Concave Summit. So my name is Nithiya Laila. I'm a culinary anthropologist. I work in the intersection of food, heritage, environment, and sustainability. And I believe sustainability is not just a trend word, it's also the intersection of cultural sustainability, geographical sustainability, and community sustainability as well. And obviously taking care of the micro takes care of the macro and vice versa. So today I'm going to share some of the work that I've been doing around the idea of planetary diet, how we can eat better for our environment, for ourselves and our planet. My focus is very much on native edible plants and regenerative farming and how that can enrich our community and our environment in the same vein. We put together a series of panels around this theme. Singapore has the aim of 30 by 30 in terms of our food security goal, which has been enhanced by the pandemic. And working together with a local educational tertiary institution called Yale NUS, we put together a series of panels around this topic. And we talked with academics, with chefs, with farmers, with government bodies. And really put them around the same table to talk on these topics, to break down the silos that we see when these comes. Not everyone who's a shareholder really gets a seat at the table, and we were trying to change that in this conversation. What we got from it was a lot of enriching sharing and data about experiences on the ground, but also experiences from the policy-making level, and how possibly those two things can intersect and overlap. So when we talk about the planetary diet, what I really am saying is how can we eat in a way that has food sovereignty, is relevant to us, is familiar to us, but also makes sense for our current cultural climate, makes sense for our evolving appetites as we get increasingly globalized, and the aspirations that people develop around food, right? In Singapore, for example, aspirational food that we kind of would attach a premium to would be around Japanese or French cuisine. We would pay a premium for kale, which is imported in from Australia or the US, but for something that's nutritionally equivalent, like sweet potato leaves, we would pay much, much less. So there is an aspiration kind of that goes around food, right? Like people have historically always kind of associated food with markers of success, with markers of wealth, markers of status, and markers of sophistication. And for sadly, traditional foods and native plants, especially indigenous foods, tend to be relegated to the lower realms of this, with poor marketing, bad branding, farmers being left out of the loop. And when even these communities, as they become wealthier, like Singapore, for example, when we rediscover moringa or turmeric or coconut oil, it's not through our lens, not through the lens of our neighbors who might historically have been consuming these foods, but through the lens, a Western lens, to put it quite bluntly. And what we try to work with here is, can we change that lens? Can we find pride, value? Can we decolonize our plates, so to speak, and but also not shy away from our history, right? If Singapore is both west and east, we bridge those two gaps very well, and our plates should reflect that, right? You don't just negate one in favor of the other or vice versa, but you try to find balance, just as you would do 80% plant-based and 20% meat, seafood that's farmed through regenerative, sustainable, ethical means. You can also make 80% of your plant foods be maybe 20 to 30% native edible plants. And how can we do that? Because we have to grow it, we have to know how to cook it, we have to know how to eat it. And with a lot of these native edible plants or traditional foods, the recipes that exist are for a family of 10, for a big community of people cooking and feeding each other. And that doesn't make sense as, even in the developing world, cities increasingly become solo or small households. And you tend to cook for one, you tend to cook for two. You have very little time because, the signs of progress are to go from being a farmer to working in an air-conditioned office for the people in the developing world. In reverse, you see people in kind of the developed world kind of wanting to leave the office and go back to farming and find value in that. So the lines of privilege, the lines of access, mirror reflections of each other in the developed and developing world. But that's to say that even in cities in India, in Delhi, in Chennai, in Bangkok, people who still a generation ago were eating traditional foods and native edible plants would now struggle to do so because they are not feeding such large families. They don't have that support system in the kitchen that's allowing them to prep these foods. So how can we make recipes more available for them? How can we make sure these plants are stocked in supermarkets? Because wet markets close at 2 p.m., 3 p.m. and someone who finishes work at 6 p.m. is not going to have access to these ingredients. So the markers of change are not just one-fold, they're many-fold, and we need to get many stakeholders involved, and that's what you're going to see in the discussions that I'm going to share later on. We've put together little snippets from the panels that we organized, and to end it off, I've got a little trailer from my show Edible Wild, that's on Channel News Asia, where we traveled around Singapore and 7 countries in the Asia Pacific, finding urban farming, kind of enthusiasts and experts, the stuff that you can find in macro cities, in major metropolises, and what you can do with them. So there's a lot growing in our big cities, and how we cannot be blind to them, and a lot of it's about just changing the way you look at things. So I hope you enjoy it.
Singapore is actually extremely food secure due to the strong and high standards of our foods. Are we then food resilient?
So I think the pandemic and the supply chain disruption has shown how fragile those systems are. I think we really need to rethink what closed loop is, right? In very much sense, a lot of farms operate in a high input, high output kind of model, right? You have lots of input. Perhaps we should look at a low input, high output model.
I think for the government, it's about ensuring by 2030, when we say we want to be food resilient, is that food value chain resilient? It's about pivoting that conversation to, okay, you started out with us 30 plus years ago, maybe started out as a small trading outfit, etc. How can we move you, to actually do a lot more activities here in Singapore?
We should actually focus and concentrate, on growing perennial greens and perennial herbs. A food forest, I believe, is the answer to this. Food forest is actually a very efficient way of growing, because you have 7 layers and you're making every inch of the vertical, horizontal space, the underground space and all that.
Paul, maybe now I'd like to get your opinion on how soil-based farming and high-tech farming can coexist in Singapore's foodscape.
I think there's room within our Singapore landscape for coexistence of many different forms of farming. Some people also forget that, some of the soil-based conventional farming goes beyond just growing food. The controlled environment agriculture, in fact, is one buffer against climate change.
When we started this, one of the questions we really asked is kale or sweet potato leaves, right? And, culture drives economy. But the takeaway has really been that we have to become individual stakeholders in Singapore's future food landscape. And I think while we're all working from home, I would encourage everyone to go to the wet markets while you can. Pick up some ingredients, be it turmeric, be it whatever herbs you see there, because those are resilient plants to grow at home.
Sovereignty is not just about the production, it's also having the space to have a means of communicating with one another, to form a position of power and like a civic position of power from which to make these discussions and choices about how the food we want to eat also produces the landscapes that we want to live in as part of this much bigger world.
At Aleska, our vision is to democratize access to fresh and nutritious food by democratizing the means and the knowledge of production. And we do this by using technology, because the only way to really democratize knowledge is to have something that's scalable, that's low cost or low friction, and that it can be adopted by anybody.
My view is that if we can use that technology that's being developed, then ensure that the anthropological food types or the heritage food types are also still relevant for our population and our culture, then we should actually pursue that as much as possible going forward.
Personally, I just feel that there is a need for Singaporeans to really experience the process of food production. I would urge the young to take up gardening so that you can grow your own food, experience the process so that you understand how food is produced, how difficult it can be, and don't take food for granted.
It's not just young people that the burden of this falls on, right? I think like anyone who is like interested in food issues, which is everyone, because everyone eats food, right? Everyone should be interested in having a stake in our food system, especially in Singapore when we already have so little people, right? I think we need all hands on deck.
Feel that there is a disconnect between even my generation and my mom's generation and my generation and the Gen Zs, you know. Maybe it's because they didn't grow up eating all those things, so they don't have those memories or emotional attachments attached to all these vegetables or fruits that we grew up eating.
In a way, it can be interpreted as like it's quite a sad situation, right? Like we are losing this food identity and we're like, you know. But I think on the good side is that it just shows how malleable identities are, right? And how quickly identities and impressions about food can change and like the meaning attached to food, right? Which gives me a lot of hope actually.
I mean, for me, even though I'm like a different generation from the rest, I think it's perfectly all right to use your herbs and all that to do some modern cuisine and all that, because otherwise people may not even try it. So let them try it in a different form and then go back to the way they would cook the traditional dishes is one way of looking at it.
As we continue to connect to the rest of the world, I can really hope that in Singaporeans' perspective, we must always remind ourselves that we are an island nation and we have and will always be an island. So we should always be proud of our island identity. And for those of us who happen to be blessed enough to be from the islanders community, like for my mom and myself, it's kind of like a big deal for us to make sure that these traditions, this knowledge that has been passed down for many generations continue to live until many generations to come, because this is how we manage to identify ourselves for who we are. And it's definitely something that we should be taking pride in.
Definitely want to echo everyone to think about how food is actually such a good platform for connecting, you know, between our human body and the external world out there. You know, food and cooking is actually how nature turns into culture. That's a quote by Michael Pollan. You know, food is also a way to show national identity, like how we had 1.9 million signatures when we were going for a UNESCO Intangible Heritage Award.
I'm Nithiya Laila. I'm a culinary anthropologist. I'm on a journey across 8 different cities and cultures to discover what amazing ingredients can be found in and around our modern cities. He literally just pushes himself out. It's not always easy. There are also leeches and some little poisonous snakes. I can't wait to put this in a dish together. But the rewards are breathtaking. Wow, what an incredible view. I'll be getting help from experts. Oh my God, it's like and showing you some surprising dishes. What you get is this kind of tangy flavor, and it comes in free from the seed all the time.